The next form we're going to go over is the appraisal addendum. This is specifically for conventional loans, not for FHA or VA, like we talked about on our third-party financing addendum. It's already written in for FHA and VA. So this is specifically for conventional financing. It even reminds you here and here of that effect. So don't make a rookie mistake. So this would autofill as far as the address, and then you're selecting one of these three options. When the market was crazy hot and we were having to be as competitive as possible, especially against cash, we were just selecting option one, the buyer waiving the buyer's right to terminate the contract for basically that option as far as the financing protection. 2B specifically was this paragraph here saying approval, buyer approval, and property approval. The second option is a partial waiver to terminate. So this is basically giving an in-between where if the value comes in at or above a certain amount, so basically say you're under contract for 400 and you write 390 there. If it comes in at 390 or above, you will still pay 400. You're waiving your right to terminate at between those two numbers, but anything south of that 390, you'd have the right to terminate still. And then the final option is an additional right to terminate. So normally I'll put 18 or 20 days in here because normally the appraisal takes about that long because they don't normally order it on day one of the contract. Most lenders will wait till you've done your inspection and negotiated repairs before ordering it just to save the buyer money. But this would be if you wrote in 400 here and it came in under 400, you now have leverage. You have the right to terminate the contract, which is your leverage to try to adjust the price. So basically, that the buyer would have the right to terminate the contract and receive their earnest money back. So essentially, it doesn't mean you have to walk away from the property. And that's a big thing that sometimes sellers get freaked out about, is thinking that they'll automatically terminate. But mainly it's just leverage to say, hey, if it comes in low, I want to have a conversation and have you drop the price or split the difference or something. I've had some weird ones over the years with appraisal coming in significantly lower than anticipated. And it affected the client's ability to purchase the property. Came in like $65,000 under list price. And we were not expecting it to come in that low. With a conventional loan, one of the benefits of it is that it's an opinion of an appraiser on a given day. It does not attach to the property address and is not public record. So in that case, we all disagreed with the appraisal. We all fought the appraisal, formally contested the appraisal and lost. And ultimately, our only recourse or only solution was to have a new lender and have that new lender pulling new appraisal. Brand new appraisal came in at contract price. So two people within a 2-week period had two different opinions that were $65,000 different from each other. So one of the big things to explain to my clients is that it is an opinion. Sometimes their opinion is not the same as our opinion, but the vast majority of times the appraisal will come in at value at the contract price because they have a copy of the contract. They know the number they're supposed to hit and they try to hit it as best they can. Now with an FHA or a VA loan, those are attached to the property, and it is stated already in that financing protection that it has to appraise for contract price or the buyer has the right to terminate. So that's why if a seller has two offers that are basically apples to apples on offer terms, closing date, sales price, all the things, but one is conventional and one is FHA, the seller will typically select the conventional loan over the FHA or over the VA due to this fact, because they have the right to then have it come in low and ask the seller to drop the buyer to pay the difference still pay the contract price, versus with an FHA or VA, they can straight up, the buyer can have leverage against the seller, say if you won't drop the price, I won't buy your house and I get my earnest money back, and now you have it attached to the home. So any other FHA VA buyer is also going to have that attached to the home for a period of time, typically 3 months. So that is why they'll normally go conventional over FHA VA. With that being said, the reason, with FHA typically is lower down payment and it is a federally backed loan. It's a Federal Housing Administration loan, and so it's a 3.5% down minimum, and normally traditionally lower credit score for those types of buyers, as well as mortgage insurance being on there for the life of the 30-year loan, because they're perceived as potentially a higher risk to the bank. With conventional, they're typically a higher down payment. There are some specific types of conventional loans, a 3% first-time home buyer program, but most of the time 5% is the minimum. And when you do 20% down, or you hit your loan to value, your equity up to 20%, even if you didn't have it when you first started the loan, you can have the mortgage insurance removed. So that can save between $80 to $300 a month, depending on what the parameters of the loan are. So normally, that's one of the other reasons why conventional is preferred over FHA for a seller, because it's perceived as lower risk to them, because it means it's probably a more qualified buyer as far as interest rate or credit score, and the appraisal protection not necessarily being written into the contract. In all honesty, I do not include this form on 100% of my conventional buyers. If we look at a market analysis and my buyers and I feel confident that the price is fair and we won't have a problem, we won't bother including it, because otherwise it can unnecessarily make our offer look less strong than other competition. If we don't include this, we may have the ability to get slightly better other terms. Now, if it's a house that's highly updated and it's the nicest house in the neighborhood, or has a pool, or has really good upgrades, and it's already on the higher price point of homes, then we will want to potentially include it, because if the appraiser brings it in low, you could have a problem with contesting it. So if I feel like the home is under fair market value, say it's been on the market for a really long time, and we're able to get a good deal on it, then I won't include it, because we won't be worried about that. This is for contingency on the sale of another home. So this is where you'd put in, this would autofill for the property they're offering on. I would write in the address for the home that my client is purchasing. Now, that may not necessarily be in Texas, that may be in another state. And then we would say on or before the following date for the contingency. So in this example, my client actually is doing a contingency. She has a home in Louisiana that needs to be sold, and it is under contract. So I would put her closing date that she is having on the property that she's selling. And this says that if her contingency, so the sale of the Louisiana home, has not been satisfied or waived, meaning like we've not removed this form, by the buyer by the above date, the contract will terminate automatically and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So this is, sometimes this closing date is the same as the offer closing date. So essentially this is opening up the seller to a lot of risk, because if that home out of state, which they have no control or say over, falls through or gets delayed, it would potentially kill their transaction, and they won't get the earnest money. The buyer will get their earnest money back. Contingencies like this, which is also known as a kick out. So if you go onto the MLS and you see a kick out, this right here, active KO, that's active kick out clause. If you see an active kick out, that's what that means. Some agents will wrongly list it as a contingent, active contingent. That's not really strictly true. So right now in Tarrant County, it's showing that there are 62 kick out contracts right now. So these, when you scroll down to the bottom, you can see the contract date, and then it says contingent on the sale of buyer's home. Under contract for sale of other home. So that's what those are. They're required to list the note. I will actually typically list in here too how many days the kickout clause is. Here you go, on or before 6/27. So specifically, they are referencing, like I reference this right here would be actually what I would be writing. So I'd say contingent with 3-day kickout, something like that. So this specifically is if seller, so this is a scenario where you could kick out a first contract. So when I have a buyer set up on a search, the 3 settings I have them set up on is active coming soon and active kick out, because that is the one time when a home under contract can have a first buyer taken out of first position for a new buyer. So in this scenario, it says if the seller accepts a written offer for the property sale, the seller shall notify buyer one, meaning the buyer that has the contract first, of such an acceptance of, and that the seller requires buyer to waive the contingency is the two options. So, so then buyer one must either waive the contingency, meaning remove this from the contract, then no longer having this extra protection if their home out of state or local doesn't sell, on or before 3 days after they've given notice, or otherwise they will be terminating the contract and get their earnest money back. So buyer one, first buyer in the position, would be under contract with this seller. A new buyer shows up and makes an offer that the seller wants to accept. So they would do a written offer and accept it with a backup clause. We'll talk about that in a sec, but backup clause, and then give a written notice to buyer one. And then the buyer needs to decide if they're going to remove their contingency, removing this form, or they're going to remove their contract, freeing the seller up to move forward with the second buyer. It's something we don't see every day. I definitely go over it more in detail with you if it happens, but I actually won one of the houses that I used to own back in the day using this clause. We kicked out a first buyer because realistically, most people are not looking at those homes that are under kickout. They're normally focused on active and coming soon, and they're not really looking at those kickouts. So if your client is interested in one, you would just reach out to the listing agent and ask, hey, I know it's a kickout. I know they're under contract with the sale of another home. How is that going? Are they closing soon? Because the actuality of it is, if the seller is tired of waiting for the first buyer, say the first buyer's home is not under contract, or the first buyer's home just fell out of contract, they may be willing to kick them out for you. However, if the buyer is 3 days away from closing, then the seller's not going to want to start over with you. So you wouldn't want to waste your time. So finding out how fast they're going to close. The other part of this, so I normally put 3, the other part of this is skin in the game. So the buyer may waive the contingency only by notifying the seller of the waiver and depositing additional earnest money. So this is making it to where if you got a good second offer, a new buyer made an offer on your listing, and your seller is excited and wants to take that new offer, the buyer two offer, well, buyer one has the choice to remove their contingency and or remove their contract. So they could remove their contingency, but if they do, they need to put more skin in the game to put more risk in. So this extra little fee is encouraging buyer one to pony up more money because your seller wanted to take up buyer two. They can't force buyer one out, but they can at least get some more skin in the game if that did happen. And it says if the buyer waives the contingency and fails to close, then basically the buyer would lose their earnest money, that they are in default, which would then give the seller claim per paragraph 15 in the contract. So, yeah, there's likely more questions on that, but that's the best I can do. Kick out clause. Don't see it every day, but if you do, it's giving the buyer a lot of protection because the buyer can go all the way up until closing. If their other home doesn't sell, they get all their earnest money back, and the only thing that the seller got was the option fee. So it might be just $100 for all of that. Next one we're going to go over is the lead-based paint disclosure. This is something that you should already have available from the listing agent. Technically, the seller is supposed to already have this filled out before a buyer does. So you would look under that supplements on the listings. You would look here under transaction desk, click there, and there should be supplements, which would be like the seller's disclosure. And so like this person doesn't have any disclosures on there. They should have disclosures on that. And it's kind of a crappy house. That might be why. Okay, I just went through 5 different listings trying to find disclosures. So you click on transaction desk. it opens up, you should have the seller's disclosure and this lead-based paint disclosure, and it should already be completed. And agents, so boo on them, agents should always have signed it already, seller should have signed it, and listing agent. And this is an example of a form you, as the agent, need to have signed it as well. In all honesty, in 11 years and seeing thousands of these forms, I have actually never seen a seller say yes, they have knowledge of lead-based paint. It's always B. Basically, somebody will often say, well, I don't know. And if they don't know, then they have no knowledge. It's only if they absolutely know that they would click A on those options. And then I would normally recommend doing the within 10 days. Often we don't see any kind of special testing. Honestly, lead-based paint is mainly a concern if you're doing major construction or you are chewing on walls. It's not really an issue we see. And then we will select that they've received the lead-based paint disclosure because we're going to be providing that as part of the disclosure packet. So this is that protection, protecting your family from lead-based paint. So this is something that they would just need to initial as part of the packet disclosure. Honestly, we don't really talk about it and go over it in detail. It is just part of their offer packet whenever there is a lead-based paint disclosure included. And it is quite long.